Hi, this is Tony Kent, and this is another episode of Tony Kent Writes and Cross-Examines. And today, putting himself forward for cross-examination is not Dominic Cummings, so that we may get onto that subject. Nope, today is Adam Hamdy, who is the author of the Pendulum trilogy and also the author of the brand new Black 13 series that begins clearly with Black 13, which is all about the character of Scott Pearce, who we'll be talking about in due course. And Adam is also one of the co-founders of the amazing Capital Crime. I'm pretty sure we'll be talking about that too. Adam, how are you?
I'm very well, yeah.
How are you dealing with the lockdown that you predicted so accurately?
Pretty well. You know, we live in a nice part of the countryside, and you know, as far as our lives are concerned, it's not impacting us hugely, other than having the kids around, which is in many ways quite nice. I just feel for the country, really, to have gone through such a terrible thing, and for all the friends and family who've been impacted by this. It's been pretty bad, but for us as a family, it's you know, not been too terrible.
Well, I think anyone who follows you or follows me on Twitter, because I retweet pretty much everything you put out about this, will know that you, as a result of your previous life and a lot of the research you do for the kind of books you write, you were pretty well placed, weren't you, to understand what was coming or to anticipate what was coming. And you were certainly more accurate about it than certain people in Parliament and Downing Street. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote a screenplay set in the aftermath of a pandemic in 2010. And I did a lot of research for that. And then in 2014, my wife wrote the UK Insurance Pandemic Preparedness Report, which was for the UK insurance industry on how, and it actually reviewed the government's pandemic preparedness plan of 2011, which is
negatively, I imagine.
No. I mean, it's actually a very good plan for influenza.
Right. For influenza.
For influenza, yeah. And obviously, prior to writing, I was a consultant, a strategy consultant, and I advised in the medical industry. Worked for big medical companies like Philips Medical Systems, and also did a lot of work with specialist medical research companies. So it's a world that I'm sort of familiar with. And when I saw what was happening in Wuhan, I thought, well, you know, this is it. You know, they're not acting in that way because this is the flu or a cold or mild, as our government told us. And so I kind of reactivated some old relationships that I'd had from my consulting life, and got to know, you know, new people who are working in this field. And it became pretty clear early on that this was serious. And so I thought it would be good to start, you know, raising the alarm and trying to alert people to what was coming.
Yeah. But as always, I recall that wasn't really, it didn't go down that well.
Yeah, I think, well, it's interesting. Some people were quite critical and sort of said, you know, stop being alarmist and this, that, and the other. But when you know you're right, you kind of just have to stick with it. And what was interesting was a number of people contacted me after lockdown, in the run-up to lockdown, and said, in fact, my old editor phoned me a couple of weeks ago and said, you saved me a load of money because we ended up not booking a holiday because of what you were saying on Twitter. I had that from a complete stranger in Canada who said, I didn't go on a cruise because of what you were saying on Twitter.
I have to be honest, I did the same. I was supposed to be booking a 4-day lads trip to Seville with a bunch of mates, and around dinner, shortly after we first spoke about this months ago, around lunch, pardon me, one time, I said, right, hold off, let's not book it yet, because a friend of mine keeps saying the following. So you saved me a load of money as well, Adam.
I also got loads of photos of people's store cupboards and food cupboards, and they're sort of stocked up in advance, which I know people have a mixed view of stockpiling, but if you do it sufficiently in advance, you're actually pulling through demand into of product and increasing the supply of essentials within retailers. So I got photos of people's food supplies and all sorts of things from all over the world. So I mean, you know, some people were critical, some people were very grateful. The most bizarre one was an old friend of mine in California in January, I think it was, went out and bought a hazmat suit. And
only the one. He wasn't stockpiling hazmat suits.
Yeah, I was talking to him last week, and he said, you know, he and his wife are having a conversation, saying, "How did you know what was the process that led me to think that this was going to come and be so certain about it, and just so early on to make the call." I'm not pleased that I was right. I was saying all the time I'd rather be the idiot that was having to buy everyone drinks to apologize and console people for falsely raising the alarm. This isn't a world that I want for anyone, or particularly for children. I think this is really hard for kids to understand.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we could talk about this all day long, but I'm going to force us not to and say, talking about stockpiling, did anybody stockpile any copies of Black 13?
I can't comment on that. I mean, that would be. But what I did early on was I realized that lockdown was going to be pretty tough for some people. So I offered. I think in the end I gave away about 60 copies of the book to people all over the country, and a few people who cheekily asked for it from different parts of the world. Just to try and entertain people during.
No, I remember that, and it's just my very crude amateurish segue into Black 13, which I have to say, for anyone who hasn't read it, is one of my. Again, at the moment it's a standalone. Obviously, it's going to become a series, SCOTT PEARCE series. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just to be clear, even just as a first book in a series, it's fantastic. You sent it to me last year. I was really, really annoyed when I saw the cover, because I thought I'm never going to have a cover that cool. And then I read the book and I was even more annoyed. It's a fabulous thriller. Absolutely. SCOTT PEARCE is just, what a character.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, I think your cover for Power Play is really cool. That's such
thank you.
Yeah, it is. It's a really striking image, and also another, it's a great book as well. Such a fantastic read. Yeah,
I'm going to have to put links on here to buy them. But getting back to Black 13, where did that come from?
So during the Brexit campaign of 2016, I sort of started noticing certain actors popping up on far right comment boards, on social media, and I just started doing some digging into that world, and started going to meetings, different sort of what I would call fringe political meetings, and talking to ex and serving intelligence members of the intelligence community, and just looking at the whole infiltration of politics by the far right. And I just thought it was a fascinating world, and I thought it would be a great backdrop for an espionage series.
No, I mean, it's completely original. It's very, very interesting. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment, my sequel to Power Play, which takes in the Patriot movement in America, and I'm trying. It's not really about the movement so much. It's just I needed a terrorist organization, so it won't go into the depths that you go into. Because I think we write quite differently in that way. I think your books, my plots are kind of, I think, a plot for the sake of a plot. That's not to put them down, but it's detail for the sake of a plot. Yours are like living in that world, I think, and I think Black 13 was a real exposure to that kind of mentality and what the hell's going on with the world in that way.
Yeah, I do try and get heavily involved in the things that I'm writing about. I try and sort of delve into the world in a real way, either myself experiencing these myself, or talking to people who have lived and operated in these worlds for a long time. And it's fairly, for most things, I think in my previous book, Aftershock, it sort of deals with cult-like belief and manipulation of people's belief systems and that. And that's a world I've delved really sort of heavily into and lived to a certain extent. And I just think it gives you that richness to help take the reader on a journey.
Well, I mean, it's, as I said, with yours, they are really taken into a world, and a world that they wouldn't know about otherwise. You say Aftershock, just so everyone knows, that's the third book in the Pendulum trilogy.
Yeah. So the Pendulum trilogy was the sort of first set of books that really gave me a platform as an author.
They were very heavily supported, I think, by James Paterson, weren't they? He was, a lot of authors, but James Paterson was very complimentary about Pendulum particularly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'll be honest. I didn't know much about the whole author support world and how important it is to have endorsements and all that. When Pendulum first came out, and my editor got in touch and said, "Oh, you've had an amazing review from James Paterson," and I was like, "Oh, that's really good. You know, he's a fantastic author." And but it didn't really strike me how much of a difference that sort of thing makes. Now I understand. You know, now I understand how important it is and how helpful it is to have that. But yeah, he was, you know, behind Pendulum right from the outset.
And I think the result of that, of course, well, maybe not the result of that, but you've built a relationship with James Paterson, and I think you're in the process of a project with him.
Yeah, so I stayed in touch because I was raised to be polite. And so
why wouldn't you?
Well, you know, I stayed in touch. I kept him, you know, sort of appraised of what was happening career-wise. And then my name was floated for consideration for a project, and it was something that I was really interested in. And we've ended up writing a book called Private Moscow together, which comes out in September. And it's
Private Moscow.
Yeah, it's another delve into in a world that, you know, people may not have been exposed to before, and it looks at Russia-US relations. You know, it's a contemporary thriller that sort of takes the central character Jack Morgan, you know, into a very modern and dangerous international conspiracy.
Fantastic. And can that be pre-ordered now if people go onto Amazon?
Yeah, if you go onto Amazon or any independent bookshop, or, you know, anywhere you can get your hands on a book, I'm pretty sure it's widely available.
Fantastic. And what about Black 13? There's got to be a sequel. I can't stop with Mr. Pierce now.
Yeah, so I've just finished the second book in the series, Red Wolves.
Red Wolves.
Yeah, Red Wolves, and that's going to take Pierce over to the States and sort of embroil him in an unusual conspiracy to take over the West Coast drugs trade. And I'm about to start work on the third book in the series, which I'm just starting to plot out at the moment. Yeah, I'm hoping people are going to respond to him as a character and enjoy reading, you know, the sort of books that are coming in the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, he is a fantastic character. I've said this to a few people, actually. I've said this to Judith O'Reilly, who writes Curse the Day, the Michael North books.
Yeah.
And also to Neil Broadfoot, who writes the Conor McGregor books. Not Conor McGregor, he's the UFC guy, the Conor Fraser books.
Yeah.
And the reason I mention those guys is there is a stock character that we all have to write, kind of. You know, there's the hero, the archetype, and we are all in. You know, my own Dempsey and you, they're all in that archetype. But it's really refreshing to get their characters, your character, I hope to include Dempsey in this, where there's something different about them, where they're not just Jack Reacher clones, because it's so easy to make a Jack Reacher clone. Yeah. It's not easy to make Jack Reacher, but it's easy to make a Jack Reacher clone. And so it's refreshing to read something from yourself or from those guys that is, that has got your arc. Of course, it's got all the characteristics they have to have. That's what it's going to be. And yet there's something different and something compelling and something to come back to. And for anyone who hasn't read Black 13, Scott Pearce absolutely has that, and you want to come back to him. So really the best of luck with that. We've got just over a minute left. So in about 30 seconds, I just want to raise the Capital Prime, because in case people don't know, you were one of the co-founders of Capital Prime along with David Headley.
Yeah, I mean, Capital Crime is, you know, I think in our first year, we were one of the largest crime festivals in Europe. Obviously, things are a little bit tricky now with the COVID pandemic, but we've got some plans that we'll be announcing in the next couple of weeks, which we're really excited about, that are going to, you know, take the festival forward, whether or not we're able to run a physical festival this year. So we've got.
But we're going to see something.
Yeah, we got some exciting news we're going to be able to share. Yeah,
well, that's great news, because for anyone that didn't go, I'll probably get in trouble with Theakston's for this, but it was my favourite. It's just a different concept, and those differences just made it fantastic. Adam, we're running out of time. I don't want to rush you off and just cut you off, so I'm going to say very, very slowly and calmly, thank you very much for giving us your time. Thank you very much for giving up your morning to speak to me, and good luck with James Paterson, and good luck with more Scott Pearce.
Oh, thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant.
Take care.
Take care.